when the first wave of incendiaries opened like steel flowers, and the wind we'd been praying for turned traitor. I watched a city ripple red beneath us and realized the training manual had never told me what to do with the sound a million roofs make when they catch fire at once. And in that instant, inside a B-29 named Mary Ellen with frost on the glass and sweat in my palms, I knew we were already ghosts of the people who had climbed into this aircraft an hour ago. But there was something I didn't know yet. We were supposed to be 30,000 feet and safe from the ground's temper. But the order came down for low altitude to beat the jet stream. And low meant seeing faces you tell yourself you'll never see. Low meant the bombs looked less like strategies and more like decisions with teeth. I was Staff Sergeant Jack Calloway, bombardier, 22 years old with a photograph of my mother in Missouri, and a rabbit's foot I pretended not to believe in stitched under the lining of my glove. I'd practiced the Norden until I could recite wind drift in my sleep. I believed if I was exact enough, the war would behave. In the cramped nose, my office with a glass floor, I laid the crosshairs over a geometry we'd studied on a map. Canals and districts drawn in pencil, neighborhoods reduced to triangles and squares, because math can be hypnotic when mercy is inconvenient. We were told the targets were industrial, because that word helped you ignore the laundry strung between factories and lives that had learned to hide under tables. We were told the slatted wood would burn fast and the wind would do the rest. We were not told what it would feel like to open the bomb bay and let the city breathe our particular kind of night. The first sticks went, then ours. You feel the airplane lighten as if it's relieved to confess. The ocean to the east was a patient bruise. The pilot, Mackenzie, asked me, voice too steady, "On?" And I said, "On." Because there are verbs a man says because he must, not because he is sure. The altimeter winked 5,000 and dropping. My mouth tasted like pennies. The radio crackled with other men pretending the sky makes us brave. Our flight engineer, Reed, murmured a hymn while he checked the engines. His voice sounded like a child trying to fill a cathedral. When the first sheets of flame folded up under us like a living thing, I adjusted the sight with the same professional little twist I'd practiced in New Mexico. Because habits keep your hands moving when your gut wants to crawl out through your teeth. And just then, down in that red geometry, a single lantern arced sideways like a thrown star and cut straight across the lie we'd been taught about, how the ground and the sky never meet. We were in March, the cruelest kind over Tokyo, when roofs were made of light promises and paper doors remembered their grain. Fire loves paper like it loves oxygen and arrogant men. The oil in the lamps, the resin in the beams, the tatami rush. The briefings had listed what would catch so we could pretend we were scientists rather than authors. The lantern's arc showed me a figure running in a street that was already a sentence about to end. She carried a bundle and a different kind of bundle. My eyes willed it both ways because the truth sometimes kills slower if you can delay the pronoun. Then the smoke rose like a chorus and the sight picture stuttered, and I did my job again. Because a man can be two things in a minute if he's been trained by a country that needs him to be. We leveled on the next point. We released. The airplane sighed. Behind me, Harris in the tail counted tracers calling them at my shoulder. Low right, 3 o'clock. Correction, 5 o'clock. Climbing. And his voice made courage sound like math again. The flak was sparse because there wasn't much left to aim it. Fire had eaten the gun crew's courage too. Then the wind answered our signal flares the way a wolf answers a whistle. Too fast, too eager. Flames leaned as if the city had tilted on a hinge. You could feel the heat in your teeth. We had been told the word firestorm in a room with coffee and chalk. Tonight it was a mouth that wanted everything. Mackenzie said, "Jack." And I realized I had been holding the sight too long after drop, tracking a neighborhood that no longer existed. I thumbed the guard on the interphone and said, "Sorry." Though sorry is a weather report when you're 5,000 feet above a woman who has to choose between the river and a road that has caught fire like a fuse. Our navigator, Owens, tapped my shoulder and pushed a candy into my palm, a ritual we'd started so no one would forget we had mouths for more than numbers. I didn't eat it. It felt like church to hold something sweet you couldn't use. And somewhere below, in that sudden wrong daylight, someone looked up at us and recognized our shape. And that recognition would change my life in a way the manual didn't cover. We had been hit before, but tonight the air didn't need guns to hurt you. It used heat and audacity. As we banked for the turn point, an updraft punched us hard enough to pop the bomb doors on a ship 2 lanes over. The sudden metallic gasp in the air made me flinch like a kid on the 4th of July. Mackenzie wrestled with it, cursing in a polite way he'd learned from his mother. "Hold her, Mac," Reed sang as if the airplane were some horse that could be taught a trick. We ran a line east to west across a map that didn't want to be a map anymore. Then I saw the lantern again, no longer arcing but still moving. A small, stubborn moon on foot. I told myself the person carrying it was a fireman, or a policeman, or someone official, because official is a glove you put on civilians to make your conscience stop itching. The truth was less heroic and more ordinary. It was a mother, and when our nose came around for a photographic run, the K-25 camera caught her exactly in the frame, and I knew because I saw it then and later when the lab boys made prints. I saw the lantern, the child, the pattern of a kimono that had taken someone weeks to stitch, and the way heat warps distance so a body looks like a prayer. The camera bit the image like a thief. My eye bit it too. I don't remember breathing as I called corrections. I do remember the curious calm right at the center of the blast lines. How the wind makes a low place for itself, the way a bully finds a clear desk to lay his books. We were a formation of 20. We had a path through the night like a ritual carved into black ice. And then, without warning and without much drama, which is how the worst things often happen, our starboard inboard coughed once, flame licked, and the gauges twitched the way a face twitches when it's about to confess. And the confession that engine offered changed everything we thought would happen next. "Number 2's rough," Reed said, but his voice had lost the hymn. Flames continued to lick the cowling. He dumped the extinguisher. The white spume bloomed briefly, a flower that didn't root. The heat rising from below didn't care about our domestic crisis. It climbed into the nacelle like an invitation. I could see the glow wrapping the blade tips as we banked again, nerves fraying into static. "Feather it," Mackenzie snapped, already adjusting trim. The prop began its slow, reluctant flattening. The flames flirted with the wing skin and then, possibly out of boredom, faded to a sulk. "We're good," Reed lied, because sometimes lying keeps the ship together until the truth can be done with at a better address. Owens recomputed our turn. Harris muttered something about being a one-wing angel. Nobody laughed. We were lighter now. We were also wrong in a way the sky could smell. Wind slid us north where it wanted us rather than where we had written we would go. "Correction south," I said. Mackenzie grunted. The city below was a broken mirror. Each shard showed a small version of a world that didn't include us. For a minute we flew through snow, no ash, no, all of it. The particles tapped the glass like insects desperate to be let into a summer kitchen. I wiped my sleeve across the bomb site and left a smear that looked like a fingerprint the size of God's. The radio squawked, chopped words, someone calling an altitude they didn't have anymore. We were not hit. We were not out of control. We were simply in a place that didn't want airplanes to remain airplanes. I thought of the lantern for no good reason, and for the best reason, which is that a mind will attach itself to the last human detail it can find when the math starts to feel like an alibi. And then, as if the night had been saving it, the river below blew sideways and turned bright like a fool's daylight, and I understood that the oxygen we all share had become the enemy's accomplice and ours. We exited on the clock, because clocks are brave when men aren't, and climbed the long, cold staircase back toward safety that felt thin as a thread. The fire below made its own weather. We rode it like drunk sailors. When we cleared the worst, the stars looked ashamed. Harris said he had 2 holes the size of baseballs in the tail, and he was fine. Nobody told him you don't measure holes in baseballs. We were short 1 engine but long on adrenaline. Mackenzie let us breathe again at 10,000. The other ships called in. One was missing and no one said its name because names are talismans and also knives. Owens handed me the candy again, and this time I ate it, as if sugar might balance something on a scale I couldn't see. We were almost free of the city's red edge when the sky ahead strobed in a slow, improbable way. White blossoms opening too precisely to be lightning. "What the hell?" Mackenzie said softly. I checked the chart. There shouldn't have been anything out there that could reach up at us with that kind of grammar. Then our world jolted once, twice, and a scatter of metal rang off our belly like hail. Mines, Reed croaked. Airburst mines. The kind that walk you home from the target like bad friends who have memorized your route. The third blossom went off left and high, and the concussion grabbed our wing and twisted it the way a bigger boy twists your arm behind your back until the tendons talk. Mackenzie fought it. The yoke kicked. The nose slid. "Hold her," Reed said again, but it sounded like a superstition. We slipped into a shallow fall. The fire below brightened as if pleased to see us again. Harris cursed a short prayer for honest flack. "Pull," I said, useless. "We're pulling," Mackenzie replied. The artificial horizon behaved as if drunk, then steadied with a stubborn virtue I still love about machines. We climbed by inches back into the smart air where men can pretend they have choices. And in that small reprieve, my mind did a trick I resent. It pictured the lantern again, the mother and the bundle, and it asked the most treacherous question a combat man can hear. What if my duty and my humanity were never on the same side tonight? And how will I live with that arithmetic when the war is done? We limped home toward the rock-salt dawn and made it to Iwo, where the runway reached up like a long gray hand. The wheels kissed and complained. The ship sagged with relief. The brakes knew their names and how to spell them. When we rolled to a stop, the aluminum smelled like sweat. Medical teams ran a perimeter, in case we had people who needed names. We did not. Our crew climbed down one by one like men learning gravity again. I couldn't feel my legs until they needed me. The ground underfoot was so honest it felt rude. A kid from maintenance touched the wing where the paint had bubbled, as if checking a horse for a fever. "Close thing," he said. And I nodded because there are sentences you say to survive without becoming a poet. Back at debrief, the coffee was saboteur weak and the donuts were contraband. The intelligence major wore a tie too cheerful for morning. He asked if we'd seen secondary explosions. He asked if rail lines had behaved. He asked if the fire behaved, as if behavior were the point. "Plenty of secondaries," I said, "because warehouses have the decency to blow up. Homes do not." He made notes in a neat hand. He asked, did we see any organized firefighting? I remembered the lantern's stubborn arc and said, yes, which was true and not what he meant. He kept writing. The photo boys developed the K-25 shots and laid them like playing cards on a table. Men leaned over to admire accuracy. I leaned too because a man should face the ghost he made. There it was, a small figure carrying a small figure. A lantern carving a thin rope of light through a wooden world-turned furnace. One of the photo boys whistled as if at a pinup. Look at that flow, meaning the burn pattern. I wanted to put a hand over the image like a priest with a wafer and tell him to lower his voice. I did not. I stayed. I looked until my eyes gave up their water. No one noticed because men in rooms like that are trained to see shapes, not faces. And sometimes the discipline that keeps you alive eats the part of you that knew better when you were 10. And if you're watching this on a bus or a couch or on a night walk somewhere far from any runway, tell me, what city are you in? What country? What streetlight is over your shoulder right now? Write it in the comments so I can understand where this night landed after we left it burning. We flew again, because that's what the schedule said, and schedules are tyrants in crisp shirts. Between missions, time thickened like syrup, and men either talked too much or not at all. Owens wrote letters he never sent. Reed carved a chess set out of crate wood and played both sides. Harris slept with his boots on and shot through nightmares with his hands. I started carrying the photo in my pocket, not because I wanted to punish myself, but because I wanted to remember I was still made of something that could notice a lantern. On the 5th mission after Tokyo, we got a visitor in the ready room, a Navy chaplain with tired eyes and a heap of letters addressed to names he read, like he had been practicing in another room so he wouldn't stumble in public. He asked if any of us wanted to talk about guilt. We all looked away like schoolboys who'd been asked to define a dirty word. After he left, Mackenzie said quietly, I know what we're doing. And nobody disagreed because disagreeing would require a confession we hadn't earned. That night in the tent, I took the rabbit's foot out of my glove and held it, and told myself I didn't believe in magic. I believed in landing gear, but belief is a flexible thing when you live by weather. The next day, orders changed in a way that felt like a moral argument hid inside a logistical memo. We would run leaflets before incendiaries, paper falling before fire. Courtesy, Harris said. Warning, Owens corrected. Paper, Reed said, then paper, and his hands shook. We went up into a sky that had the sudden gall to be pretty. Over the edge of the city, I watched the leaflets tumble. Thousands of small flags white against gray, each with kanji I couldn't read, but wanted to believe said leave and live. The radio picked up a weak music station, a woman singing a song so brave and so ordinary. I almost told Mackenzie to turn the airplane around and go home. And there in the glass, between the altimeter and the sight, I made a quiet, private promise. If the war gave me the chance to choose in a smaller way, in a room with more air and fewer maps, I would choose for the one with the lantern, not the fire. The chance came in a way I didn't recognize until it was already in my hands. A week later, between sorties, we took a ferry to the far end of base to pick up a crate of small parts that couldn't make sense by themselves. At the dock, I saw a girl, a woman really, but thin the way hunger edits years, standing beneath a broken sign with a baby on her hip and a satchel at her feet. She wore no uniform but carried herself like someone who had memorized rules. Her eyes flicked over us like we were a chapter she needed to summarize. When our jeep stopped, she stepped close and in English careful as chalk said, "You are flying to Honshu, yes?" Her vowels were a map of another life. Owen started to answer, and I stepped in front of him because I recognized something in her voice I hadn't heard since Missouri. That particular courage that lives under kindness and loves instructions. "We fly where the book tells us," I said. She nodded as if I had confirmed weather. "There is a camp," she said. "Children. The fire took the town. We need paper, not bombs." She lifted the satchel onto the jeep like a woman who had once lifted laundry and now lifted a week's worth of hope. Inside, hand-drawn maps and a letter in English from a missionary doctor who had once delivered babies in Kansas and was now delivering them in a gymnasium with the windows knocked out. "Leaflets," she said. "Bread? Anything?" She did not ask us to stop the war. She asked for paper and bread. Mackenzie, who had 2 daughters with identical dimples, said, "We don't run the print shop." And she nodded again, as if to remind herself that disappointment is a language she already speaks. Then she did something with her hands that I still see when I can't sleep. She touched the baby's head, then the satchel, then her own throat, then made a small, formal bow as if closing a book. Owens whispered, "We can't." And I said, "Maybe we can," because I had already learned there are rooms where men can lean on a scale without the scale breaking. We took the satchel. We wrote nothing down. We drove back with the crate of parts and a new weight in the jeep that no one mentioned, and all of us felt. And that night, when the wind finally went quiet and the mess tent ran out of lies, I went to the photo lab and asked a private. I'd once taught Poker how fast he could make something that looked official enough to fool men who needed to be fooled. We printed 1,000 leaflets that said in the right language, "Go west at dawn. The river is dangerous. There will be food at the old school. Do not go toward the smoke." We signed it with a doctor's name that belonged to a real man and a real hope. We stuffed them into sacks marked metal clips, because no one asks questions about small, boring things. The next morning, we took off before the schedule said we were airborne, and flew a line that looked like a mistake, and above a cluster of roofs that had refused to become numbers. We opened the bay not for fire but for paper, and watched instructions fall like a different kind of snow. Harris murmured, "Merry Christmas," like a blasphemy. Mackenzie said nothing. His hands looked steady and his knuckles looked old. We had 5 minutes of being the men I promised that lantern we might be. Then we closed up and turned to the night's business, because wars do not end when you write a better sentence over a smaller neighborhood. We dropped fire again, further east, because the coordinates were coordinates and our orders were orders, and good men can only disobey for so long before the universe finds a way to notice. But in that unapproved interval, I felt something inside me not clean but awake, and I understood that a man can be the same soldier and still choose a room with more mercy in it when the door opens a crack. After the war, people would ask me if I felt like a hero, and I would tell them I felt like a man who had used a very expensive machine to set a table he wished someone else had set with soup. We flew home by islands that looked like stepping stones for gods, and then over the big water that erased men's intentions. Stateside, they threw a parade at a base that smelled like hot dogs and future. My mother hugged me too hard and forgave me the letters I didn't write by writing more. I worked in a factory that made windows because I thought perhaps if I made enough windows, the world would learn to see through itself. That didn't happen, but the work made sense to my hands. At night, I dreamed of lanterns and of rivers that wouldn't stop carrying guilt downstream. Years later, on a Sunday with a stubborn rain, a letter found me with stamps that had been searched for meaning by more than one government. It was from Kansas, from a doctor who had once learned to deliver babies before the wind turned cruel. He wrote, "Your paper saved 32 at the school." One was a woman who ran with a lantern and a child. She teaches now. He added, "I don't know your name. I only know someone chose a different room for 5 minutes." I read it twice, and then I sat a long time with my hands on the table. The way a man sits when he remembers to be grateful and has no one to thank who will answer. Kept the photo, the one the K-25 took tucked behind my driver's license until it faded to a ghost of ash and outline. I married a woman who didn't mind my silences. We had a daughter who held her flashlight like a wand and believed light was something you shared by pointing it where people were afraid to look. When she asked me what we did in the war, I said we flew and we came home and we tried to be better later, which is an answer that tells the truth without saying much of it out loud. At the grocery, I will sometimes stand too long in the aisle with the paper towels because the sound of 1,000 sheets unrolling makes a small thunder that rattles a long, narrow hallway in my head. When that happens, I put the roll back and buy soup instead. On a winter night, I will go to the garage and hold the rabbit's foot. I told myself I didn't believe in, and let the fur remind my hand that the world once included things that were only soft. I know you want a moral, or a clean edge where the story ends and the lesson begins. I am not the man to give it. I can only tell you there was a night when the wind loved fire, and we were the men who opened the door for it, and also that on another morning we opened the door for paper and asked strangers to live. Both are true. I can tell you an engine coughed and kept us honest. I can tell you a lantern drew a line through a city that tried to forget its map, and that I have been following that line ever since. Across a country that forgave us faster than it should have, and into rooms where I can sometimes choose a better verb. And I can ask you gently and only once, the next time you have 5 minutes and a door opens into a smaller room where mercy is allowed, will you walk through it? Not because I did. I am not a model. But because someone once looked up into a night a boy from Missouri set on fire and said, "I will still carry light." If you've come this far with me, tell me where you are right now. What city? What country? Because I like to imagine that lantern traveling. This time not in fear, but in memory. And your comment is how I keep it moving. Before you go, if stories like this matter to you, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with one person who believes 5 minutes can change a life. Your support helps me keep telling the pieces of history that still ask us what we will do next.